so enjoy this. I wish somebody had told me.
Good day, man. I'm cooking.
Yeah. Because it's relatively downhill.
I've had enough goodies today. Why? Why? We'll go and sit on the floor. We'll single down first.
This is a reminder to turn off all cell phones, pagers, camera speakers, space heaters, bureau phone, particularly, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, and other berries.
Thank God you're Thank God you're someone's here. Oh, he has to say something. I have to write it.
Okay.
Did you listen to the second? Did you listen again?
Yeah. He repeated whole chunks of the last one. It's even less news even.
But just as full of humor.
Yeah, no, it was pretty. But he did repeat that he loves it. We need t-shirts. Now that it's become actually a staple.
The noon. Yeah, I guess when you.
And look, they have the little thing.
Yeah. He does have a picture.
They have little towels. Huh? Huh? How cool was that?
Very trendy.
Thank you. I tried.
What did you say?
Comfy.
So far. Because this is the first time I've worn them. I just bought them. And they're high. Because it's a platform. For those of us who read it, hang out the Bible. So you actually are up.
And it's more cushy.
It's very cushy and they're comfy. I forget where I got them, but it was in one of those cushy stores. What are we asking?
Secretary, where is on the rise?
Well, that's, yeah, I've got my little search question.
Sort of the general concept. The general concept is taking over. Is that a red?
That's better, we're going for you. Oh, we winning. Screw that. Oh, we winning.
I'm not really prepared to answer that question. Show us that.
Did I mention it? Yeah, I just said I was at 4 and I've been like 16 years. I don't
NBC's cool.
Right. I can't keep, I can't see that straight.
Jennifer. Who's doing the lateral
So we wouldn't be. So it's not them, and it's not you. So we don't.
Good afternoon. It's been 4 months since the President's announcement and the change of strategy in Iraq. The 5th and final Surge Brigade is arrived in Baghdad, and we expect it to be fully operational capable by the middle of next month. We're starting to see a shift in momentum that comes with having additional ground forces on the ground, and the refinement of our operational approach has garnered greater support and situational awareness in various areas throughout Baghdad and in and around Iraq. We're continuing to search for our missing soldiers, and our determination and resolve to locate our missing soldiers is unwavering. We're conducting well over 100 patrols a day, and that in conjunction with our intelligence-driven operations, we are in hopes of finding our soldiers. The 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit has arrived in theater. They're offloading personnel and equipment, and we expect them to move north into the Anbar province and expect them to be operational on or about the middle of next month as well. In western Iraq's Anbar province, we continue to see overall violence levels drop significantly. The Iraqi Army soldiers, as far as recruitment and volunteers, is increasing, and we expect to have 500 Iraqi Army soldiers graduating from the basic training facility in Habaniya, and they'll be assigned to the 7th Iraqi Army Division, which is located in the Anbar province. We are going to expand the graduating class, the next graduating class in Habaniya, to 1,000, and that's based on the volunteer rates increasing in the Anbar province, which is positive news. We're experiencing increased levels of support from local Iraqis as well throughout other areas of Iraq. The number of you have already reported on the 41 kidnapped victims that were kidnapped by al-Qaeda, and they were found in a al-Qaeda hideout near Bakuba. What's important about this is this rescue was made possible by the tip that was provided by an Iraqi citizen, and we are continuing to receive actionable tips from Iraqi citizens. Al-Qaeda continues to use vehicle and suicide-borne improvised explosive devices as their weapons of choice. These particular indiscriminate killers, as well as mass casualty-producing weapons, are seen as success through the eyes of al-Qaeda, and we have found more and more that although they're unable to reach their primary targets, they will pick secondary targets such as funeral processions, markets, and mosques as their targets to create the mass casualties. In Afghanistan, we continue on the offensive against the Taliban. We think that we have got the Taliban on their heels. And as a result of a number of operations, we have basically, the Taliban has suffered numerous losses and has suffered losses to their senior leadership over this past month. We feel as though we've received the initiative from the Taliban, but this summer will tell as they've completed the poppy harvest season and as they continue to try to go on the offensive. They have reverted to asymmetric type small-scale, high-profile attacks, but this has not resonated with the Afghan people, and we've actually had initial indications that some Afghan leaders, as well as Afghan citizens, have actually turned against the Taliban in regards to these types of attacks. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Yes.
General, with the 2nd and 3rd ID coming in, do you expect that they will go generally to the Baghdad area, or is there going to be an effort to quell some of the violence that's been popping up in some of the other regions? You also mentioned sounded sort of a positive tone in a shift in momentum. Can you give us any specifics?
Yeah, with regards, the tactical commander makes the ultimate decisions with regards to forces disposition on the ground. But that being said, there are, of course, you hear about the northern belts and the southern belts that General Petraeus talks about, and getting at those, because that's areas where insurgents have had the opportunity to sit back and plan some of these attacks from those areas and then move on into Baghdad and perpetrate their attacks. In this particular case, what we're trying to do through the clear, hold, and retain is take those particular areas away from the insurgents and the al-Qaeda, make it more difficult for them to travel, at least freely. And so some of those forces will stretch, of course, in Baghdad, where we need those forces. But I'm sure, as we talked about the 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit as well, going out to at the Anbar province, there are areas where the al-Qaeda and insurgents in the past, we've gone in, we've cleared the area with very little resistance from those particular, the enemy. And then when we pull out, they move back in. In this particular case, we are starting to be able to retain, through the use of our Iraqi security force partners, that's building credibility in their capabilities with the Iraqi people. And we're seeing that through these increased tips that are coming from the Iraqi people, not only to our forces, but also to the Iraqi security forces. And that's an extremely positive sign. Yes, sir.
Sir, do you have any information or details about the 5 British citizens kidnapped yesterday in Baghdad? Do you know where are they?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know exactly where they're at, but I can tell you that, and I know General Petraeus just talked about this, we're searching just as intently as we would for our own soldiers, and they are searching a number of areas. I don't want to necessarily put that out for operational purposes, but we're aware of the 5 British citizens that were kidnapped. We also are aware of the report that these particular individuals were wearing uniforms with patches that had the Ministry of Interior, as well as vehicles marked with the same type of markings. But other than that, which already has been released, I do not have any additional information at this time. Yes, ma'am.
What does it tell you that when they kidnapped these British contractors, that they drove in 19 Interior Ministry vehicles into Sadr City? Does that tell you that the Interior Ministry was somehow in cahoots with the kidnappers?
Well, I don't want to speculate. I'm sure there's an investigation going on with this, just as there was in a previous similar type incident. But I'm sure once they investigate both the Iraqi government as well as our forces, and they get the facts out, we'll get those facts. But right now, I don't have any of the facts. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about momentum again at the very beginning, but what's the actual trend you're seeing in Baghdad and Diyala in terms of sectarian murder, sectarian violence, car bombs? How's that trend looking?
Well, I know General Pace spoke on this a little bit, that back in January we had 1,400 deaths, and it's hard to quantify exactly what caused these particular deaths. But with that being said, we're down to the past 2 previous months to about 500. So we're down about 40% in Baghdad, and then throughout the remainder of Iraq down to 20%. So we're seeing a decrease. Of course, we know that al-Qaeda and their associated elements understand that that's being used as a tool for measurement by a number of folks, and so they're pressing hard as well, and they have a vote. So we're pushing hard, and as I stated, on a number of occasions where they have been unable to reach what we believe is their primary target, they have basically advocated to a target that produces mass casualties in high numbers, and those have been funeral processions, mosque, as well as markets.
Given all of that, if I could just follow up for 1 second, now May is turning out to be one of the deadliest months of the war, actually, for U.S. troops. I'm wondering if you have an assessment as to, number one, why that is, and what are you seeing also in terms of Iranian-style weapons, EFPs and/or other Iranian-style weapons coming into Iraq?
With regards to your first part of your question, first and foremost, it's been a tough month, but realize, please, that these numbers are associated with a service member and to a family, and so with that being said, my sympathies and our prayers go out to those family members of the lost service members. We're operating in and around Baghdad in greater numbers now with Fard al-Qanun. The operational risk were, I believe, stated up front by General Petraeus when we first discussed this plan, that getting out and among the Iraqi people in concert with the Iraqi security forces was important to build credibility in the Iraqi security forces capabilities. And that gives that operational space and security in order for them to conduct their self-governance. We also understand that the enemy is continually to work on understanding how we do business, and it's important for us to get out in front of the enemy. You know, it is, we're working hard. In this particular case, we're continuing to get at it. We're moving into places where we haven't been, not necessarily before, but we haven't been and stayed with the frequency that we're staying in these areas now. And there are some areas where in the past, as I stated, the enemy elected to just move on out, wait till we departed and come back in. In this particular case, they're finding that harder to do. And the fact that we're retaining these areas, we're setting up checkpoints throughout Baghdad, and therefore they're finding it harder to get back in, they're finding it harder to get out, and therefore we're having more contacts with the enemy.
And Iran?
With regards to Iran, there is technology, and the Quds Force members, we understand that there is technology and there is training that's being conducted by Iranian Quds forces in Iraq, and we're starting to see some of the technology pieces show up in Afghanistan as well. As far as the leadership involvement with with Iran, we still haven't been able to train it. We know it's at the Quds Force level. Yes, ma'am.
You said that violence is continuing to drop significantly in Anbar province. Could you put numbers on that for us, perhaps compare it to this month last year, and say what it all means? Because as Barbara pointed out, it's been one of the highest casualty months for U.S. over there.
Attacks are down by 50% over the past few months. I don't know if I can necessarily have the numbers off the top of my head to go back and take a look as opposed to a year ago. But attacks are down by 50%. And
Where did they start at? What is 50%?
well, we're just talking about the past few months. I think in relation to basically when we started to see the Anbar tribal leaders start to take the fight to the Al-Qaeda and expel.
Numbers that's sort of meaningless. I mean, it could be there were 10 attacks and now there's 5, or there are 500. And
I'd have to get with you and give you those numbers. I don't have them here readily with me. Yes, sir.
You mentioned in your opening statement Al-Qaeda's continuing responsibility for the spectacular bombings. Do you have any sense of percentages, even broadly, what part of the IED, VB-IED attacks are attributed to Al-Qaeda, what percentage to the Sunni insurgency, and which to the Shia faction, and what does that tell us about the state of the war today?
Well, no, sir. I don't know if we have those numbers to basically break it out by those different factions. But what I can tell you is, they continue. Their success is not necessarily whether they can explode an IED. Their success is whether they can get the high-profile type of attacks associated with killing innocent people. So it's fairly easy to emplace an IED when you don't have to worry about collateral damage or what necessarily your target is. If you're not going to discern between civilians or military when you blow that thing up, I think that's a fairly simple weapon to use, and it has been and continues to be their weapon of choice by virtue of every time they blow one up, it seems to get attention, and that seems to be their reasoning for using this particular piece.
If I could follow, sir, please. When you say they, I mean, from this podium, we're always told that there are several wars going on. That's a very nuanced and fine thought. So who is the they? I mean, who is killing the most Iraqis? Who's killing the most coalition forces with IEDs and VB-IEDs? Al-Qaeda, the Sunnis, or Shias?
Well, I think we can honestly say that the suicide and the vehicle-borne, the preponderance of those are Al-Qaeda. Okay, but I don't have specific numbers. I would just say it's in my opinion that most of those are perpetrated we've associated with Al-Qaeda. You can't get down to specifics. That's a difficult thing to track, and I don't think we have those numbers. Yes.
General, on the casualties, it's already been pointed out that May was one of the deadliest months, and the President himself has predicted a bloody summer, especially in August. Does the command have a sense of when, or a plan for when, either the situation will come under control and these casualties will go down, or there may have to be a re-examination of strategy again?
Yes, sir. I can tell you that General Petraeus, being the tactical commander downrange, I don't want to get out in front of him, but I know that probably in September when he comes and when we listen to his assessment, will probably be that. I don't know. I can tell you that I think General Petraeus will have an indicator on the maneuvers in his assessment when he gives it in September, I think is what I'd recommend we wait on.
So you're saying you're sort of expecting a similar level of casualties for the next several months? There's no particular expectation of a change?
Well, sir, I can tell you that we continually adjust and we continue to provide force protection measures for our soldiers. And that being said, we're going to continue to fight now that we have our full complement of surge brigades in Baghdad. We're going to continue on with the cleared, hold, retain, and establishment of the joint security stations and the combat outposts throughout Baghdad in order to mitigate the freedom of maneuver of Al-Qaeda and the insurgents. So we're going to continue to get at it. We're going to continue to provide the necessary support for our soldiers to provide them extra protection, and we're going to continue to adjust our TTPs in order to provide that force protection as well. Yes, ma'am.
As more U.S. troops move out into the communities and interact with Iraqis and the death toll from the U.S. side goes up, have you seen an increase in the number of escalation of force incidents?
You know, I have not. And that's not to say that they don't go on. We do investigate those when they do happen, but I have not seen an increase in the escalation of force incidents.
Steady throughout the surge?
From what I've seen. Yes.
Sir, you provided a total attack number change for Anbar province. Could you tell us what the trend in total attacks has been in Baghdad and in Diyala?
Well, I can tell you that in Baghdad, the attacks has kind of risen slightly, but it's not a trend. There are spikes, and those are associated with these high-profile attacks where they go out and blow up a bomb that creates 15 to 11 casualties among the civilian population at a time. In the particular example is the mosque bombings here recently, where we had several civilians killed in a bombing of a mosque. So right now, we're seeing, like I said, not necessarily a trend in an increase, but we see spikes periodically in the attacks that are perpetrated by Al-Qaeda and the insurgents.
Sir, do you have any numbers for Baghdad, Diyala? Nationwide, there was a GIO report earlier this month said there was little or no change in daily attacks, that they averaged about 150 nationwide, and that had continued from the first of the year through April. Do you have any figures, sir, on where this trend is going?
I'll have to go and get the figures and take a look and see if we have those figures and provide those to you, but I don't have.
There's a spike, though. Can you quantify the spike at all? As you said, 50% decline in Anbar. What's the spike in Baghdad?
Well, I'm saying that periodically there's no trend. That what we have is no attacks, or we have a steady state attack, and then you have a high profile attack, which makes it look like there is an increase in the number of attacks, but not necessarily.
You said there was a spike right now.
Well, there's not. I'm saying that there are spikes, and those are associated with your high profile attacks.
So what is it in Baghdad and Diyala, just to follow up? Can you quantify it for us? As you said, there's a 50% decline in Anbar. Can you give us a comparative number in Baghdad and Diyala?
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I'll have to get those back to you. But yes,
so
ma'am.
you, just to clarify, you will provide the total attack number for Baghdad and how it has changed over the last few months, as well as for Diyala?
Ma'am, I told you I'd get back with you with the trend, where we're at on a basic average of attacks. I'll see what we have, and we can provide that back to you.
Today?
Well, I'd have to figure out when we can get the information and get that to you. Yes, sir.
Question about Afghanistan. You said the Taliban is on its heels. Can you tell us what series of developments leads you to that conclusion?
Well, I can tell you, sir, that we've gone on the offensive this year as opposed to in the past, and getting into the taking the initiative away from the Taliban. In this particular case, we've been able to take the offensive in the south and in the east to the Taliban, inflicting numerous losses on them and their forces, as well as taking and killing a number of their senior leadership. One of those of note, which I talked about the last time I was up here, is Dadullah Lang. There are several others that we have killed as well that we think will, although not cripple them, will set them back for a period of time. And as I also said, the poppy harvest is over. So we expect that at some point in time, those that were involved with that will now join the fight. So The fight's not over, but we were able to take the offensive. We'll continue to take the offensive through several of the operations we have in Afghanistan, and hopefully continue to inflict casualties on the Taliban. Yes.
You mentioned signs of success, and you mentioned numbers of tips. Can you detail the change in the number of tips, and can you point to other concrete, specific data that suggest to you the positive trends?
Well, I mentioned the one with regards to the 41 that we rescued. There are also actionable tips out there that have led to caches, that have led to bomb-making IED cells. To get specific, I don't have those specifics and the numbers, but I know that they're on the rise as we build credibility in Iraqi security force capabilities, and these people are coming forward. And it's not just in Al-Ramadi or Anbar province, Saladin, it's in other regions as well.
Are there other broad measures of success that you would point to?
We're doing slow and steady progress. I mean, the Iraqi security forces' capabilities and their capabilities is a positive note as well. Right now, the Iraqi Army forces are in the lead in all provinces, with the exception of the Anbar province, and that's due in large part basically to the recruiting piece, which we're getting at. And so that's a positive sign, and that's we'll continue to build on the Iraqi security forces. Because ultimately in this clear, hold, and retain, we plan on turning over these areas to the Iraqi security forces at some point in time. Yes, ma'am.
You've talked about increasing Iraqi forces. We've heard varying numbers over time. As a whole, across the country as a whole, can you say how much more of an increase you all want in the number of Iraqi security forces?
No, ma'am. That'd probably be something better discussed with Multinational Force Iraq because they understand the conditions on the ground and what's required and what's necessary. And I know that that's a continual assessment by General Petraeus and his folks with all the operations on the ground. So, I mean,
Specifically about Anbar and wanting to increase from 500 to 1,000 the number of graduates there. You don't have some similar ideas about how you want to grow the force overall?
well, I know that there's a plan out there, and I know that Multinational Force Iraq is working that plan, and they're working the recruiting piece. And as I said, I think they'd probably be the best that could probably give you the accurate answer on where they are with any adjustments. Yes, ma'am.
As you look at these attack trends that you're going to look into first, do you have any indications on the trend specifically in IEDs?
As in what, for clarification? In the trend?
Well, in terms of the number of IED attacks, however you measure it, per week, per day, since we've seen such a rise in U.S. casualty rates. Are IED attacks on the rise or decline or steady state?
Well, our IRD attacks, from what I've seen, are pretty much steady across the board in the number of IED attacks over the past several months. The fact that their TTPs are getting more advanced and requires us to adjust accordingly, that is out there. And
just to ask you, a lot of people don't know what TTPs are.
tactics, techniques, and procedures that they use to employ those systems.
Are you saying that they're, in the last couple of months, that they've improved or changed some?
Well, we have seen a tactics, technique, or procedure whereby they have not just responded to initial IED, but they set it up for first responders. That's not new. That's something that's been out there, but it's something that they continually to refine. And that's what I was saying, that we got to stay out in front of that, and we continually adjust our techniques in order to increase the survivability and protection to our troops and our soldiers. Yes, sir.
The attack yesterday in Diyala with the helicopter and then the two Bradleys that were struck, was that a coordinated ambush in the sense that the chopper was brought down to lure Kura forces in, or was that just a matter of circumstance?
Well, that particular incident is under investigation, but I can tell you in the past they have some pretty detailed tactics, techniques, and procedures with regards to helicopters. I think General Simmons spoke on that not too long ago with regards to having heavy machine guns mounted in the back of vehicles and then using the heavy machine guns in concert with shoulder-fired weapon systems in order to bring down the helicopters. I don't know, and I'm sure as soon as the investigation comes out that we'll get more facts. We'll be able to talk about the specific incident involving the 58. But What I can tell you is that we continue to adjust our flight maneuvering and our routes in order to not become predictable and in order to make it more difficult for them to execute their TTPs. But it does look like this was a complex attack.
General Simmons has indicated that the cell that had been primarily responsible for the earlier shoot-downs had been pretty much exterminated. Is this a sign that the tactics have been passed on to other groups, or that there's information sharing that's been going on, or is this more of the same cell? Any information you have on that?
Well, and like I told you, I'm sure the investigation will prove that through. I'm sure that just like with any other thing, the IEDs as well as how they address the shoot-downs of air helicopters is something that's not just specific for one specific group. So I'm sure that that's some training piece that's out there, but I don't want to speculate on this particular incident. And I'm sure that once they get more fidelity on what exactly happened with this incident, they'll probably be forthcoming.
Time for one or two more.
You handed over control of 3 Kurdish cities today to Iraqis. Are you still on track for the fall to hand over all the provinces, as Major General Caldwell said earlier this year?
Well, you're talking about the provincial Iraqi control of the 3 Kurdish pieces up to the north. As you probably can remember, there was another date associated with that particular Iraqi control. And so I will tell you that we're on track as of right now, but, conditions change, and commanders on the ground got to make their assessment to determine whether the conditions are right for provincial Iraqi control of the other provinces. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks.